Now, for years after the prequels were done, and basically up to when Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, we would periodically hear news about a Star Wars television show called Underworld that George Lucas wanted to do, and that was always in some stage of development, but never came to fruition. And as the name kind of implies, the show would have dove into the criminal underbelly and other shady aspects of the Star Wars galaxy, taking us into the lower levels of Coruscant. It also would have dealt with a few other things that we know of, which I'll get to in a bit. The problem with the show, however, the reason why it never saw the light of day despite being talked about for years, and it even had somewhere between 50 to 100 scripts written for it, is it would have been too damn expensive to have it look the way Lucas wanted it to, and he wanted it to visually be on par with something you'd see on the big screen or in a movie theater. And to pull that off at the time would have meant spending somewhere in the ballpark of $50 million an episode, which, to put that into perspective, is higher than the entire budget of most movies, and blows away the per episode cost of something like Game of Thrones, which in the later seasons was well over $10 million an episode, or the budget of The Mandalorian, which cost around $15 million per episode. And much to the credit of George Lucas here, who even 15 years ago already foresaw that the future of entertainment would start to shift to television, where much more time could be spent drawing out and exploring story arcs, and that Star Wars would lend itself well to taking more time to explore its characters and concepts, like we saw in the Clone Wars animated series. Anyway, much to the credit of Lucas, he didn't just immediately greenlight the show anyway with a budget a fraction of what was needed to make it be what he really wanted it to be, just to make a quick buck or two. Always the innovator and visionary and storyteller, he instead decided to patiently wait until the technology was invented to make his show the way he wanted to make it, without bankrupting himself in the process. And even today, I'm not sure the technology exists yet to make this show look the way Lucas likely envisioned it would look without breaking the bank. And just recently, some test footage from roughly 10 years ago came to light, a link to which you can find in the description below if you haven't seen it already, which I'm guessing a lot of you have. And what needs to be stressed here is test footage. This is more of a proof of concept than anything else, not the start of an actual episode or a pilot or anything like that. It's simply to get an idea of what the show would look like and feel like, the tone they're going for, and to give Lucas an idea of what could be done and how much it would cost him. And when looked at in that capacity as an experiment or a test, I think it looks pretty good, especially for the time period it's from, keeping in mind again, this is now 10 years old. It makes me want to see it turned into a show still today, especially considering most of what we know about it sounds really good, that this would have basically been, among other things, about crime bosses moving against each other, all the while having to deal with the Empire. We also would have seen such characters as Boba Fett, Jabba the Hutt, Han Solo, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine, though how much of each of those we would have seen is unknown, and it sounds as if only Boba Fett, played by Daniel Logan, who played him in Attack of the Clones, would have been the only thing resembling a main character. Also, this show would have supposedly given us Palpatine's backstory and made him a sympathetic character, which I don't know how I feel about that one. I kind of just like him being evil to the core, and there was never really anything good about him. Not to mention, I really liked his backstory in the book Plagueis, and wouldn't mind seeing it added back into the canon, and simply tweaked if needed to fit the new canon. Maybe a love interest could be added to the book, which could be Rey's grandmother, I don't know. Just find a way to make the book canon again, Lucasfilm. Anyway, yes, I do normally like complex and relatable villains, don't get me wrong, but in this case, I think I'd rather Palpatine just be more or less an evil bastard and that's it. Either way, apparently we would have learned he was wronged by some heartless female crime boss at some point in his life. Most likely, this would have been seen in flashbacks to explain the way he'd become. And again, not sure how I feel about that, but there are those who have read the scripts and say it's very well done, and does indeed make you feel bad for Palpatine. And all I've got to say to that is, she must have been one evil bitch to make you care about Palpatine. Furthermore, this show would have also explored the early days and formation of the Rebel Alliance. Saw Gerrera was originally going to be in this show, and would have been, again, an extremist, but instead he eventually found his way into the Clone Wars, and then of course Rogue One brought him back to the more original idea, and he's now also been in a few books as well as the show Rebels. And he wasn't the only thing that supposedly originated in these scripts and still found its way into the current canon, like the name Sheev or Sheev Palpatine apparently comes from these scripts. Things like Empire Day, which we saw in Rebels, also comes from these scripts. Turning the Jedi Temple on Coruscant into the Imperial Palace, again, from these scripts. The Church of the Force, first seen in Rogue One, comes from the idea that there would still be those who, in secret, believed in the Jedi and the Force, and that they'd have an underground community on Coruscant. All in all, it sounds like the show would have tried to cover many bases and been quite the bridge between the prequel and original trilogy, and lasted again between 50 and 100 episodes. It also would have been a lot more dark and adult in nature than anything else we've seen before. Rick McCallum, who produced both the special editions and the prequels, said at one point that the show would have dealt with crime bosses that control such things as drugs and prostitution. And honestly, from everything I've heard or read about the show lately, and the little nuggets of information that came out here and there over the years that I heard, and now after seeing this test footage, I really wish we would have gotten this, or would still get it. I mean, I don't know if we'd ever see it turned into a show. Even today, the technology doesn't exist, or should I say isn't cheap enough, for them to feasibly do this the way I think Lucas wanted it to be made, and I think the way most of us fans would expect it to be made as well. But I'd still love to see these scripts used and turned into something, even an extensive series of books and or comics, instead of this Project Luminous thing we're getting, which we've just recently learned is only books and comics. We shouldn't expect to see it tie into movies or games. And I think I would have preferred to see Project Underworld instead, though I say that without knowing exactly what Project Luminous will be, so who knows, it may still end up being something good and interesting. Either way, since this comes from Lucas himself, I'd really like to see these scripts become a story we fans get to experience in some capacity. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this test footage, and if you want to see the 50 to 100 scripts that exist turned into something, or if this whole idea doesn't sound all that great to you and should be a project forever left unfinished. Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.